welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share stories where people believe they encountered a Goatman. These stories include a young man who had a creature charge at him in the early 90s, a woman who saw a goat-like figure standing in her room when she was a child, and a young man who had a strange experience in an abandoned fort in California. But first, we start with a story from Alabama where a couple saw a terrifying creature while on a road trip. By the way, if I sound a little hoarse, it's because I've been sick and it has left me hoarse for most of January. This is why there has been a lack of videos lately. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, click on the join button below. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from a poster from Alabama, who says that it's a creepy state to drive through. He has had some paranormal experiences in his past, but only one cryptid encounter. He isn't quite sure what he saw, but he saw it during the day as the sighting happened before noon, and he got a good look at this thing. After posting his story online, the consensus was that he crossed paths with a Goatman. His encounter took place at the beginning of 2019. The original poster, or OP, and his girlfriend decided to take a break and get away for the weekend. They were driving on a highway in a swampy part of the state, which was located in southern Alabama near Mississippi. He mentions here that there were a lot of bridges in the area. As they drove, his girlfriend suddenly called out with urgency for him to look. He turned his head and caught a glimpse of what he calls a grotesque creature. It was crouched down on all fours and looked to be eating something. He says it all happened very quickly, but he did slow down to get a better look at this thing. That's when the creature stood up onto two legs, revealing a humanoid form except for its head. This creature's head was that of a goat, which stood out in stark contrast to the rest of his body, which resembled a man. It had horns atop its head and appeared to be a light-colored goat. They watched this thing turn and retreat into the woods. The couple continued on their trip, unable to help themselves from discussing the sight they had seen. He ends his post by saying he is still trying to wrap his head around what they saw that day, and that it happened so fast he can't be 100% sure what he saw. His girlfriend was convinced it was a man with a goat head, and he can't deny that he saw the same exact thing. He then asks if anyone has any knowledge about cryptids like this or has experienced a similar sighting. Well, it just so happens that someone commented with a story about a similar sighting, but we will get to that in a minute. As for this encounter, I'd say it was pretty cut and dry that this was a Goatman. I would have liked to know if the rest of the body was covered in fur as well, but he only describes the head. I'm not surprised that they were both focused only on the head, being that it was a literal goat walking around on two legs. I'd probably be more focused on the head too, trying to figure out what exactly I was looking at. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is probably the last thing anyone would want to see while driving along on a trip with their significant other. A literal monster standing on the side of the road. For me at least, stories where people are driving are less scary and/or intense because they can get away easily. Usually, that is. These beings are said to be fast enough to keep pace with vehicles going at high speeds, and I've heard a number of stories where they do just that. However, I can say with full confidence that I would stomp on the gas and not look back if I saw a creature like that standing on the side of the road. What do you think about this one? And what would you have done in that situation? The next story was actually shared in the comments of the first story, in which a user told the tale about what happened to him in West Texas around 1990. The original poster says where he comes from, there aren't many trees except for this peculiar 2-acre patch of dense foliage just off the main road. He had ventured out there with 5 of his closest friends, curious as to what was in the middle of that area. I'm sure what they weren't expecting though was an encounter with a cryptid. The OP and his friends were looking for a secluded spot to enjoy some drinks without having to venture too far from town and risk running into coyotes and rattlesnakes. The 6 of them parked on a residential street behind the wooded area and together made their way into the patch of trees. It was night but not very late, however late enough to create an eerie atmosphere. They proceeded into the trees in a single file line with the OP leading the way. As they walked, they attempted to act as though they were unafraid. Eventually, they progressed far enough that the lights of the nearby cars could no longer be seen amidst the trees. His then-girlfriend had grown so afraid that they momentarily stopped due to her not wanting to go any farther into the wooded area. This spread to the other two girls in the group, causing them to hesitate as well. However, in an attempt to display that he was daring and brave, the OP declared that he was not afraid and walked a few yards ahead of the rest of the group. Before long, he realized that his friends, who should have still been within close proximity, were no longer visible. He could also no longer hear them either. Glancing to his left, he noticed a small clearing approximately 10 to 15 feet away. Then something caught his attention, something white and close to the ground. He mentions here that he was looking upon something that his brain could not quite comprehend in that moment. It finally clicked that he was looking at a white goat. He had never seen a goat in real life before, making this encounter all the more unusual for him. Furthermore, he thought it was unusual that there were no fences or anything to confine the goat to that area. He says here that he wasn't sure how much time passed in that moment, that it only felt like a few seconds, but a wave of fear suddenly washed over him. This creature turned its gaze toward him, rose onto its hind legs, and charged straight at him. He says the amount of fear that he felt in that moment was unlike anything he had ever felt before. This creature took about 8 or 9 strides before the OP turned and sprinted back the way he had come. He yelled for everyone to run as a 2-legged goat was hot on his heels. He and his friends fled from that place and never returned. He told his parents when he got home, but his dad laughed it off, dismissing it as the property owner just scaring off kids who ventured onto his land. The OP says that may be the case, but he isn't so sure. He explained to his dad that whatever it was charged directly at him without any regard for obstacles in its way, that being trees or anything else. He describes it as being about 4 to 5 feet tall and running on his hind legs like a human, but with the legs of a goat. He ends his post by saying looking back at the encounter is kind of amusing now, being that he had what appeared to be a goat charging at him running on his hind legs. He points out that he didn't hear a single sound throughout the whole ordeal, not even a single footstep, which makes his encounter even more unusual to him. My first thought when reading this story is that this could have been a juvenile Goatman. They are usually said to be much taller than 4 or 5 feet, but I mean they have to come from somewhere, this is my guess at least, and grow to be that tall. We have stories detailing encounters with juvenile dogmen and Sasquatches, so it isn't that far-fetched to see one about a juvenile Goatman. But imagine thinking you're looking at a normal goat just to have it rise up on its hind legs and charge at you. I can't say I blame him for running. One thought that came to mind is that this thing was trying to just scare him out of the area it had made its home. With how fast these cryptids are said to be, I'm guessing it could have caught up to him if it had wanted to. In any case, I'm just glad that the OP and his friends made it out of there safely. What do you think about this one? And what would you do if a Goatman charged at you? The next story comes from a poster who says she was haunted by what looked to be a goat standing upright on its hind legs. She puts the word haunted in quotes, being that she believes what she actually saw was a Goatman. This story also brings up the argument, are cryptids physical beings, supernatural, or both? This story takes place in Baltimore, Maryland, and happened when the original poster was around 4 or 5 years old. She begins her story by saying that she distinctly remembers seeing something in her childhood home that appeared to be a goat standing upright. She never saw it fully illuminated, but can still vividly recall the shadowy figure as she laid in bed. She describes it creeping down the hallway towards her, and what she remembers the most was its unmistakable horned head. Terrified, she would cry out to her parents that she had seen a goat. However, despite her clearly not having a speech impediment, as she points out, her parents thought she was saying ghost rather than goat. She would do what she could to correct them, but they still did not believe her. One day during that time, her grandmother took her to a petting zoo. She warned her about the goats, telling her to be careful because they'll eat anything. The OP says her grandmother's words sent a surge of panic through her, but as fate would have it, one of the goats started biting her shirt. This brought about a full-blown meltdown which involved her bursting into tears, screaming, and her attempting to climb over the fence. Her grandmother didn't know why she was having such an extreme reaction, but the OP says that if she had known about the Goatman, she might would have taken her hysteria more seriously. It wouldn't be until she was 36 years old when she heard about the Goatman of Maryland, which sent chills running up her spine. This brought back her early childhood memories, and the depictions of Goatman she had seen looked exactly like what she saw in her home when she was so young. She says she is certain the Goatman is what she saw, and that her living in Maryland at the time, where there was a known creature lurking around, is too coincidental for her. She ends her post by saying she will never again make fun of someone who believes in cryptids. In response to a couple of comments, she gives further detail about her encounters. She told one user that the fear the Goatman carried with it was undeniable. They mentioned her encounters being supernatural, to which she said her memories do seem to align more with the presence of a supernatural being or a spiritual entity rather than a physical one, and that she never actually heard the sound of hooves clicking or discovered any remnants of fur. However, she does say that after 32 years at the time of her posting, the terror she experienced and the distinct outline of this thing's body remained with her. In response to another commenter who asked her to describe its behavior, she said it seemed to her that the response was more akin to a malevolent or otherworldly entity rather than a tangible being. But she does say she speculates the cryptids might possess some form of supernatural power. As for the Goatman she would see, its gait was peculiar, both awkward and purposeful, with its horns gently bobbing up and down as it moved. She ends by saying she remembers a smell that accompanied this creature, one that smelled just like a match that had been put out. It is often talked about whether cryptids are physical or supernatural. The main theory regarding this is that they are both. The main things that point to this being the case are mind speak, which has been documented in a lot of Sasquatch and Dogman encounters, and I'm sure many other different types of cryptids as well, and the fact that they are there 1 second and gone the next. The favorite theory behind this is that they use portals. One story comes to mind where a man had a Sasquatch encounter and blacked out. When he later woke up in the same area where he had his encounter, he had many texts from different countries. I can't remember exactly how many he said there were, but there were a lot, welcoming him to that country, all in the span of just a few hours. The smell she described isn't exactly what people normally describe when seeing a Goatman. The smell usually associated with this cryptid is described as metallic, kind of like how blood tastes in your mouth. However, it doesn't rule it out, but I can't say for certain that's what this was. It very well could have been a paranormal being in her room. But for her to hear about a Goatman years later and it bringing back those memories could point to this thing being the Goatman of Maryland. What do you think she saw in her room when she was a child? The final story of this episode comes to us from Fort Ord, which is located in Monterey, California. Fort Ord is a former United States Army military base in Monterey Bay. The base was closed in 1994, and now most of the land makes up the Fort Ord National Monument. However, a small portion of the property remains an active military installation known as the Ord Military Community. The original poster's encounter takes place in the deserted barracks of the fort, where he went exploring with his friends during his high school years. It wasn't long after he heard about Fort Ord that he also heard about a legend that added an eerie twist to their encounters. One of his classmates shared a story about a disgruntled homeless man who supposedly frequented the area. According to him, the man was not only violent but also appeared to be afflicted with some sort of rabid behavior. He even mentioned that the man had horns. However, the OP dismissed it as an exaggeration, but he couldn't help wondering if there was any truth to it. Perhaps the man had cutaneous horns, which is a skin condition giving the appearance of horns on the head. On one occasion, he ventured into the abandoned fort alone. It was during this trip that he stumbled upon an underground chamber with a putrid smell. Within the room, he found an old mattress covered in grass and garbage, as well as a deer carcass lying on the floor. This was accompanied by a collection of small bones and feathers he guessed belonged to an owl. He swiftly retreated, fearing the unknown inhabitant of that eerie place, not wanting to come face to face with whatever it may be. He has returned to the abandoned fort on occasion, only to be greeted by spine-chilling screams and loud thuds. He ends his post by urging anyone who goes there to proceed with caution because he knows that whatever is lurking within is still there. One commenter who lives near the abandoned Fort Ord says she once ventured into the old barracks to have a look around. Little did she know she would immediately regret that decision. As she entered one of the buildings, she felt as if she was making a big mistake just by being there. She saw old mattresses, dead things, and drug paraphernalia, which made it abundantly clear that these buildings harbored a dark past. While there, a feeling came over her that these buildings should be left abandoned and unexplored. Additionally, she says there is a group of individuals who engage in airsoft battles in the vicinity about once a month, and she can't help but wonder what stories and experiences they have had there. She goes on to say that she would love to get a paranormal investigation team and have them pay a visit to the old fort. Research she has conducted revealed that her home in her subdivision was built where a former child development center sat on the base. She and her husband have experienced numerous occurrences where appliances, TVs, and lights have mysteriously switched on and off. On one occasion, her TV remote began to rattle and shake, causing the buttons to be pressed and altering the input settings. The old abandoned fort sounds like a hotspot for cryptid and paranormal activity and just the right kind of place those entities like to inhabit. I included this story with other Goatman stories because of the rumors the OP heard from his friend about the homeless man being there and him supposedly having horns. This and also what he found when he explored Fort Ord. Now I will say the room he saw with the mattress and that really bad smell could be attributed to a homeless man living there. But the deer carcass? That makes me think something else has made this place its dwelling. The spine-chilling screams and thuds he heard when he would return only cement this for me. Again, I will say that this could also be attributed to a person. As for what made that chamber its home though, I can't definitively say, especially being that there wasn't a physical sighting other than the rumors. But rumors can rarely be taken as fact. And given that the person who commented on this story talked about having paranormal experiences in her home, it very well could be a paranormal entity or entities in that area. However, I will go back to the deer carcass and the bones and feathers found there. That makes me think it's something physical, although I can't say for certain what I think it could be. What do you think could be in the abandoned Fort Ord? Goatman, paranormal entities, or something else? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.